example number 1. We have the example. Make sure you're looking at your notes. We have this example of Tom who brought an antique car in 1990. And since it's an antique car, that would be like a classic car, and it's going to increase in value. And so we are going to write the equation for the increase in value. Now, we're not going to do it. We're going to let the calculator do it for us. So you should like this. The calculator gets to do all the work. When you have a problem with years, most of the time we do not enter the years into the calculator. It kind of makes the equation too big. And so when he first bought the car, that's 0 years. And so then 1995 would be 5 years later, and 2000 would be 10 years later. And so this is the data that we are going to enter into the calculator, understanding that 0 represents the year 1990. Okay, how do we enter it into our calculator? Well, the first thing we're going to do is clear the data that somebody else put into the calculator. So you're going to push the stat button. Stat button is right here, kind of top middle. And we're going to clear, so we're going to choose 4. And we're going to clear the first list, so we're going to push second 1, comma. The comma is right above the 7. That's where the comma is supposed to be. Second 2, enter, and the lists are cleared. Now, another way to clear the list would be to clear the memory in the whole calculator. I would ask you not to do that because it uses up a whole lot of the battery power if you clear the whole calculator out. Most of the time, I don't bother to clear the list. I just type over it. Okay, next we're going to enter the data. Question? Above the 7. The comma is above the 7. And so we're going to enter this data into the calculator. Where are we going to enter the data? In the stat part of your calculator. Now, somebody said L1, and that reminded me. When we are using the stat part of the calculator, we need L1 and L2 in our calculator. If those would be missing, you need to let me know so that I can fix it. Sometimes people do weird things and cancel them out. The stat button right here is the stat button, stat, enter. And why do I have all of these decimal points? Because I put it on 10. Is the next one 15? And so please enter the data into your calculator. Okay, and then enter the 10,000 into the calculator in the L2 column, and the 21,000 and 41,000, 82. Now, we are going to look at the data in our calculator, but if we look at the normal graphing screen, the default screen, I don't see anything. Because the default screen goes from -10 to +10, am I going to see 163,000 on that calculator screen? That's why I need to set the window. Now, they go through and tell you what numbers to set the window. Where did they get the -10 and the 30? What's the smallest x? 0, so that number needs to be less than 0. What's the biggest x? 20. So this number needs to be bigger than 20. If I'm counting up all the way to 30, I don't want to count by ones, I'm going to count by fives. The biggest number up here is 163,000. That's why this number is so big, because it has to be bigger than the 163,000. Well, where do I set this window? Right here is the window button. You click the window button, and we're going to type in the numbers they gave us. We're going to count to 30 by fives. They left the negative 10 in there, and we're going to count to 200,000. If we're going to count to 200,000, do we want to count by ones? No. And so that's where this came from. They don't want to count by ones if you go all the way to 200,000. Now, the next thing it tells you to do is turn on your stat plot. There are the directions to turn on the stat plot, and so it says second y equals, and then some of you probably already have right there, it probably says on. And if it was used in a different class period, it may already be turned on. And so I'm going to enter, and I am going to highlight that word on, and I'm going to enter that right there. And then all of the rest of these are the default that are already set there. Turning the stat plot on means that when I graph it, I'm going to be able to see the points. If it's not turned on, you can't see the points. So when I graph it, do you see the points? If you do not see the points on your calculator, one of two things is wrong. Either your window's not set right, or you don't have the stat plot turned on. So before we go on and get the equation, I need to check the data to make sure it's right, because if I put the wrong data in, I can't get the right equation out. So I'm going to hit trace. Trace right there. And so is this the first point that was in my table? Right arrow. There's the second point in my table. Right arrow. There's the next point in my table. There's the next point. There's the last point. I have all the points that I'm supposed to. Trace just allows you to go through and check the points. Now, I am going to use the calculator to find the equation. Now, when you have possibly done this before, you found linear equations. Does that data look linear? It looks exponential. It looks like our exponential parent graph that we did a few weeks ago. So we're going to go back to the stat button, arrow over to the word calculate, but we're not going to choose 4 like you have done in the past, because this is not a line. We're going to arrow down to 0. Enter again. There is the equation that goes with my data. Now, it's rounded off to 3 decimal places because we set the mode on 3. There's some more decimal places in there. They're just not showing up. And so this is the equation that goes with this data. This number right there is the A. This number is the base. That's the equation. You see where that goes on your note paper. Now, to answer this next question, what is the value of the car in 2020? This is 2020. This is when you bought it. I'm looking for 30 years. I can plug the 30 in right there and solve it myself, or I can let the calculator solve it. I'm going to let the calculator solve it. So I'm going to go back to the y equals. If you have something in that screen right there, clear it out. I can type the equation in for myself, or I can let the calculator type the equation in for me. This last box on your paper tells you how to make the calculator type the equation into the y equals. So, are you at y equals? Is it cleared out? On the main screen, do you have the equation? Okay, I'm in y equals, and I'm going to push this equation, this button right here that says vars for variable. We got the equation by using the stat button, that's statistics. I'm going to choose 5. Arrow over twice because I want an equation. Push enter and see my calculator put that equation right there in the y equals. I'm going to do it again in case you missed it. Now, it doesn't do anything unless you have the equation on the home screen. Okay, how did I get to the home screen? Do you have the data in? After you have the data in, you go back to the stat button, right arrow, 0, enter. Once you have that on the home screen, in the y equals, go to vars. 5, arrow, arrow, enter. Now the question was, what is the value of the car when the car is 30 years old? So I'm going to scroll down to 30 years. So at 30 years, this is the value of the car. I can't do this screen until I have an equation in the y equals. And so this is the value of the antique car after 30 years out of the table. If it's rounded a little differently, that's okay. Is it? Oh, I miscopied a number. This is an 8? Okay. Okay, so the next problem we're going to do is on your homework paper. Please look at your homework worksheet. Instead of having my info in a table, I have my info on a graph. Now, I showed you how to clear the data. I rarely actually clear the data. Most of the time, I just type over the data. So I am going to go to stat 1, enter, and I'm just going to get over here in this column right here, and the L1 column is your x values. What is your x values in problem 1? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And all those zeros are on there because I put it with mode 3. You can clear the data. I usually just type over the data. And enter in the data off of the bar graph. Okay, so Also, because I'm lazy, I don't usually set the window. The calculator can set the window for you, so you might want to go back to your notes and write this in next to the notes where it says set the window. You can go in and figure out the window, or you can let the calculator figure out the window for you. To have the calculator figure out the window for you, push Zoom 9. 9 stands for statistics. If you push Zoom 9, it will let the calculator set the window for you. Also, once you turn the stat on, it stays on. You don't have to do that on every single problem. If the plot is highlighted in the y equals screen, the stat is turned on, you will see the points plotted. You just turn it on one and it stays on. You don't have to do that on every single problem. So if I push Zoom 9, it's going to graph those problems. Now, I noticed on these problems, that wasn't what I was expecting to see. And so if I trace this, did I type that point in correctly? Did I type that point in correctly? So by tracing it, and also by just looking at the graph, it doesn't look very good. And so I can catch a mistake by looking at the graph before I try calculating the equation. So that's what the equation looks like. That does look almost linear. I could probably find a pretty good line to go with that, but we are going to find the exponential graph. So we're going to do stat, right arrow, 0, enter. 0 gives you the exponential equation. So this is the equation. Would you please squeeze that in there in between the problem and this other answer? How did I get this other answer? How did I get what? This asks for the number of bears in 2020. This is the 0 year for my data. If I start at 1995 and go to 2020, how many years is between 1995 and 2020? Try 25. Okay, so I have this equation in the calculator. I can type it into the y equals, or I can let the calculator type it in for me. Bars 5, enter to equation, and now the equation is in my calculator. One more time to get that. Bars 5, arrow, arrow, enter. Now do you see the line going right through my data points? I should say curve because it's not a line. Okay, so second, I need 25 years. In 25 years, there's 4.6 plus some more decimals. Why is this 1,000? Because this was 1,000. Questions? Next problem. I assume as you start learning to drive and hopefully start learning to drive better and better, you know that if you're going at a very fast rate of speed, it's going to take you longer to stop than if you're going at a slow rate of speed. And that is actually an exponential relationship. So we are going to go back in to the stat, And just like I said, there's lots of ways to clear the data out. Another way to clear the data out is arrow up to L1, clear and enter. Arrow up to L1 and clear and enter. And 40. I'm not going to put the whole data chart in there because there's something I want to show you first. But I do need several data points in here. So I put some data points in here, and I need you looking up here because I want you to see what happens. When I find the equation, stat, right arrow, 0, enter, it doesn't find an equation. It says error. Why is that? It says, yeah, it says there's a domain error. It's not that. Do you remember that the exponential graph looks like this? And what is there right down here at the bottom of the graph? An asymptote. Where is that asymptote? At 0. The calculator can't find the equation because this is at the asymptote. So you need to leave those 2 points off of your data. And so, no, you can just delete those out, and then put the rest of your data in and find the equation. But the reason it said there was an error is because 0, 0 is on the asymptote, and it can't figure out the asymptote. So then you can put the rest of the data in and find the equation.